after being frozen for 24,000 years in Siberia. Scientists dug up the animal from the soil of a river in the northern Russian region of Yakutia. Known as the Bdelloid rotifer, the multicelled organism is able to withstand extreme cold. An earlier study in 2018 revived frozen worms from another area in Siberia that were 30,000 years old. Well, let's now speak to Timothy Barraclough. He's a professor of evolutionary biology at Magdalen College in Oxford. He joins us now from there. OK, Timothy, I'm going to start by asking you just how to say the name of this worm properly. The Bdelloid rotifer? What makes it so hardy and so special?
It's a Bdelloid rotifer, so with a silent B. And these are animals, they live in extreme habitats, so they live in places where their water dries out occasionally, where it freezes occasionally, and so they do have very high ability to survive those kinds of stresses.
I saw it's managed to live without having sex for millions of years. How's that even possible?
As far as we know, they're all female, so they lay eggs that are a direct copy of the mother, barring a few mutations. It's very unusual. It should put them at a big disadvantage, but somehow, as a big group with lots of species, they appear to be able to do this. It's one of the questions that scientists are interested in understanding about them.
What would it have looked like? What life would it have looked like back in the day? I read it would have been living under the feet of woolly rhinos?
Yes, I think there were a few now extinct mammals around at the time in those areas, so they would have been coexisting with those large mammals like woolly rhinos and so on. So the habitats that the rotifers themselves live in were probably fairly similar back then to they are now. They would barely notice these large animals that are many, many times larger than them.
Can other organisms survive in conditions like this for as long? And can we potentially learn from organisms like this when it comes to technology for humans, perhaps?
Well, this is one of the surprising and fascinating things about this study, that it appears to show that they've survived in the ice for so long. I mean, in fact, there are some other possible explanations for this. One is that these tiny animals, they do disperse around very well, and it's possible that they arrived even more recently into the ice, or that they somehow arrived in these samples after they were taken out from the ice. Now, the authors tried very hard to exclude this possibility, but because these animals are microscopic, they blow around in the wind, it's quite difficult to be sure about that. So I think at this stage, I still have some skepticism, I suppose, or some interest in following this further and see whether is it really that they've survived so long? Can we exclude these other possibilities?
Given that I know there are concerns around climate change, for instance, and melting ice, could we perhaps find other surprises in these these iced areas, perhaps ones that aren't quite so friendly?
In principle, I suppose. I mean, the difficulty is that cellular life, I mean, ice breaks down cells, and so most things you would expect that after this length of time that they would not be viable anymore, and so there shouldn't be too much risk from that. But I mean, certainly the permafrost is melting in these areas. If there really are organisms that have been able to survive for such long periods, then potentially you would be releasing more of those. But I think at this point, it still seems likely that most animals would not be able to survive. And I still have some questions whether these rotifers have actually survived for this long.
Very interesting there. Timothy Barraclough, a professor of evolutionary biology from Magdalen College, Oxford. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise here on Al Jazeera.
Thank you.
Now, moving on.